The courtroom smelled like old paper and central air conditioning, the kind of cold that had nothing to do with temperature. Josephine Hartwell stood perfectly still while the clerk collected the signed documents, her hands loose at her sides, her face giving away absolutely nothing. That stillness had taken her years to master. Her mother used to call it her marble face, the look she wore when she was feeling everything and showing none of it. Across the table, her soon-to-be ex-husband, Clifford Hartwell, leaned toward the woman sitting beside him, not his attorney, the other one, Paige Dunmore, with her copper highlights and her little smirk, the one she'd been wearing since they walked in together, like they'd already won something. Josephine didn't look at either of them. She watched the clerk's hands instead. The way the woman straightened the papers into a neat stack, tapped them twice on the desk and slid them into a manila folder. 31 months of marriage reduced to a folder, Mrs. Hartwell. Her attorney, a composed woman named Diana Chu, touched her arm lightly. We're done here. Josephine picked up her handbag. She didn't say goodbye to Clifford. She didn't say anything to Paige. She walked out of the courtroom the same way she'd walked in, chin level, shoulders back, heels quiet on the marble floor. Behind her she heard Clifford say something. Then Paige's laugh, low and satisfied. She kept walking. The black car was parked at the end of the courthouse steps, engine running. Theodore, her grandmother's driver for the past 19 years, stood beside the rear door, white-gloved hand already on the handle. He was 62 years old and had the posture of a man who had never once slouched in his life. Mrs. Josephine, he said, and opened the door. She got in. Through the tinted window she saw Clifford and Paige emerge at the top of the steps. Paige stopped walking first. She grabbed Clifford's sleeve. Josephine watched her mouth form words she couldn't hear. Who is that? Whose car is that? And she watched Clifford's expression shift from confusion to something she'd never seen on his face before. Uncertainty. Theodore pulled away from the curb without being told. Josephine turned and looked straight ahead. She had known about Paige for 14 months. That was the part she never told anyone except her grandmother. Not 14 days, not 2 weeks after some gut-wrenching discovery, 14 months of knowing, watching and deciding what she was going to do about it. It started with a receipt. She hadn't been snooping. That needed to be said clearly, even if only to herself. She had gone into the pocket of Clifford's gray blazer looking for a parking ticket she needed to call about. And what she found instead was a receipt from a restaurant in Midtown called Allura. Italian, good wine list. The kind of place Clifford took clients when he wanted to impress. The date was a Thursday. Clifford had told her that Thursday he was in Baltimore for a regional meeting. She'd set the receipt on the counter, stood there for a moment, put it back in his pocket. Then she called her grandmother. Her grandmother, Eloise Hartwell, born Eloise Beaumont, widowed at 64, now 81 and sharper than anyone Josephine had ever met, had picked up on the second ring. She always picked up on the second ring. Come for dinner, Eloise said once Josephine had explained. Not I'm sorry, not are you sure? Just come for dinner. Josephine drove to the house in Buckhead that evening, the old Georgian on the corner, lot with the magnolia tree in the front yard that dropped petals every April like it was apologizing for the winter. Eloise was waiting on the porch with 2 glasses of sweet tea and an expression Josephine recognized from her childhood. It was the face Eloise wore when she was about to say something important and wanted the other person to be sitting down first. Do you love him? Asked. Josephine thought about it honestly. I did. I'm not sure I do anymore. Eloise nodded slowly. Then the question is not what he's done. The question is what you're going to do. I don't know yet. Then you don't move yet, Eloise said. Not until you know. What Josephine knew at that point was this. She was 36 years old, a licensed structural engineer with 12 years of project experience, a salary that had grown every year since she was 25, and a marriage in which she had been the primary financial anchor since year 1. Clifford worked in commercial insurance sales. He was charming, good at his job, and had a habit of spending just slightly more than he made in ways that Josephine had always quietly absorbed without making a scene. She had paid off his car note in their first year of marriage, because he was about to miss a third payment, and she couldn't stand the thought of his credit tanking over something so avoidable. She had covered the rent gap when his commission check came in short. 3 times. She had paid for the kitchen renovation he'd insisted they needed, the one that had run $20,000 over budget, because he kept changing his mind about the countertops. She had loved him. That was the part that made all of it sting differently. Not the money, not even the betrayal, but the fact that she had genuinely carefully, with full knowledge of who he was and who she was, chosen him. After the dinner at Eloise's house, she did 2 things. The first was that she called a private investigator named Alonzo Webb, a quiet, methodical man her attorney had once recommended. She told him what she needed and gave him the name Paige Dunmore. The second was that she called her financial advisor and reviewed every joint account they shared. What she found there was more illuminating than anything Alonzo eventually brought her. Clifford had been, in the nicest possible interpretation, creative with their joint accounts. There were transfers she hadn't authorized. Not enormous ones. Nothing large enough to trigger a fraud alert, which she suspected was intentional. Incremental amounts moved to an account she didn't have access to. Dinners charged to the joint card that she hadn't attended. A weekend in Savannah billed to an account that bore both their names. Josephine printed every statement going back 18 months. She put them in a green accordion folder and labeled it documentation. She kept it at her office, not her home. Her grandmother called it building the record. Banks don't care about feelings, Eloise had told her, leaning forward in her chair at dinner one night, 6 months into what they had quietly started calling the process. Judges don't care about feelings either, not really. What they care about is paper. Always be the one with the paper. Josephine thought about her grandmother's first husband, a man whose name Eloise no longer said out loud, and how Eloise had left that marriage with nothing but what she could carry, at 29, with a 4-year-old daughter and a name that meant nothing to anybody in Atlanta yet. She had built the Beaumont portfolio from one rental property in Decatur, one house, 3 bedrooms, a leaking roof and a tenant who paid late every month for 2 years. By the time Eloise was 60, that portfolio was 11 properties. By the time she was 75, it was a trust. She had never needed a man to rescue her. She had simply refused to be stopped. Josephine's firm, Callaway Engineering. She'd kept her maiden name professionally, which had seemed like a small thing when she did it and now felt like prophecy, had been awarded a contract in the spring. A mid-rise mixed-use development in West Midtown, 14 months of work, a fee structure that represented the largest single project in her firm's 4-year history. She had started her firm 2 years into the marriage. Clifford had supported the idea verbally, the way he supported most things, enthusiastically at the announcement, vaguely after the first month, not at all by month 3. She had not held that against him. She knew who he was. What she had not known, not then, was how much she would need that firm to be entirely legally, unambiguously hers before the end. She had never put his name on anything, not the LLC, not the business account, not the office lease. She had always told herself it was simply good business practice. Mixing marital and business assets created complications. It was also, she could see now, the thing that would save her. 3 months before the divorce filing, Alonzo Webb delivered a report. Josephine sat alone in her office on a Friday evening and read it in full. Paige Dunmore, 31, junior account manager at Clifford's firm. They had been seeing each other for approximately 2 years. There were photographs, dates, hotel records. There was a documented conversation, obtained legally, through social media records, in which Clifford referred to Josephine as the arrangement and told Paige they'd be together properly once things were sorted. Josephine sat with that word for a long time. The arrangement. She thought about the kitchen countertops. She thought about the car note. She thought about Thursday nights and Baltimore meetings and receipts in blazer pockets. Then she closed the folder, put it in her desk and called Diana Chu. She filed on a Monday morning. She did not tell Clifford in advance. He found out the way she had decided he would find out. From a process server at his office at 11:15 in the morning. Diana had timed it. Josephine had not asked her to do that, but she had not asked her not to either. He called her 17 times that afternoon. She let every call go to voicemail. He came home that evening. They were still technically sharing the house, which was awkward but legally necessary for the time being, and stood in the kitchen doorway with an expression she recognized. It was the face he wore when things hadn't gone the way he planned, and he needed someone to explain why. "You could have talked to me," he said. She was standing at the counter, her back to him, making coffee she didn't particularly need. "I could have. So why didn't you?" She turned around and looked at him. She had thought about this moment. She had rehearsed different versions of it. In some versions she said a great many things. In others she said nothing. In the end what she said was, "What would you have told me, Clifford?" He didn't answer. She took her coffee to the bedroom. She locked the door. That was the last real conversation they had. The next 4 months moved quickly and slowly. At the same time, the way months do when something enormous is being decided in small, careful steps. There were depositions. There were counterfilings that Clifford's attorney initiated, and that Diana handled efficiently and without drama. There was a morning when Josephine sat across from Clifford in a conference room and watched him look at the financial documentation she had compiled. 18 months of records. The accordion folder, the printouts. The Alonzo Webb report. And she watched his attorney put a hand on his arm as he started to say something, and she watched him stop himself. She thought about Eloise. Always be the one with the paper. She was the one with the paper. The settlement was not a fight. She had not wanted a fight. What she had wanted was clarity, and the documentation gave her that. A clear picture of what had been taken from joint accounts, what had been misused, what was owed. Clifford's attorney pushed back on 2 items. Diana held firm on both. In the end, Clifford signed. The night before the final hearing, Josephine drove to Buckhead and sat on Eloise's porch. The magnolia was blooming. It was April, right on schedule. Eloise was 81 years old, and she was still sharp, and she was still right about almost everything. And she sat in her wicker chair with her sweet tea, and she looked at Josephine for a long time without saying anything. "Are you ready?" she finally asked. "I've been ready for a while," Josephine said. Eloise smiled. It was the small private smile she kept for moments she considered settled. "I know," she said. "I just wanted to hear you say it." On the morning of the final hearing, Josephine wore a charcoal sheath dress and her grandmother's pearl earrings. The earrings were not a sentimental choice, or rather, they were not only a sentimental choice. Eloise had given them to her 2 weeks earlier, along with a set of documents that Josephine's attorney had reviewed and confirmed were entirely in order. The Beaumont Family Trust, established in 1991, last amended the previous December, had been updated to reflect a direct transfer to Josephine Marie Calloway of certain properties and holdings upon Eloise's wishes. The trust's total value, as of the most recent appraisal, was approximately $41 million. Josephine had sat very still in Diana's office when that number was read aloud. "Your grandmother was very thorough," Diana said carefully. "She's been thorough her entire life," Josephine said. The courthouse was the same one. Same marble floors, same recycled air, same particular stillness that government buildings seem to cultivate deliberately, as if they want you to understand that whatever you're feeling, the building itself feels nothing. Clifford and Paige arrived together. Josephine noted this without comment. Paige sat in the gallery. She had no standing in the proceeding but had come anyway, which was a choice Josephine found interesting. She wondered what Paige thought she was going to witness. She wondered if Paige had expected tears, begging, some form of scene that would confirm that Clifford was, as he had apparently described her, the arrangement, temporary, transitional, something to be left behind. The proceeding took 40 minutes. Josephine signed where Diana indicated. She listened to the judge's summary. She stood when the court officer said to stand. When it was done, she gathered her things. She did not say anything to Clifford. She did not look at Paige. She walked out of the courtroom the way she had walked in, and the hallway was long and quiet, and her heels were the only sound. Theodore was waiting. He was always waiting. He had driven Eloise to every significant moment of her life for 19 years. Hospital visits, closing meetings, her 80th birthday dinner at the restaurant on Peachtree. When Josephine had called him 2 weeks ago and asked if he would be at the courthouse on the morning of April 19th, he had said simply, "Of course, Miss Josephine." The car was a black Bentley Mulsanne, Eloise's car technically, though Eloise had not been in it in 4 months since her hip had made getting in and out of low vehicles difficult. The car was maintained and registered and insured and sat in the garage of the Buckhead house waiting for occasions that called for it. Josephine had decided this was one. Theodore held the door. She got in. The leather was cool. The interior smelled faintly of the cedar blocks Eloise kept in the seat pockets. Josephine sat back and looked out the window as Theodore walked around to the driver's side. She saw them at the top of the steps. Clifford had stopped walking. He was staring at the car with an expression she had never seen on his face in 31 months of marriage. It was not anger. It was not smugness, the look she had grown accustomed to these last several months. It was something more confused than that. The expression of a person who has walked into a room expecting to find one thing and found something else entirely. Paige said something, grabbed his arm. He didn't respond to her. He was still looking at the car. Josephine watched him for exactly 3 seconds. Then she looked away. Theodore pulled into traffic, and the courthouse disappeared behind them. And Josephine Calloway, her name, her firm, her name, sat with her hands in her lap and felt, for the first time in 14 months, the particular quiet that comes not from giving up but from finishing something completely. Her office was on the 14th floor of a building in West Midtown, 5 minutes from the development site she was currently overseeing. She was at her desk by noon. Her project manager, a steady 29-year-old named Rufus Ochoa, handed her a coffee when she walked in and did not ask about the morning. She had not told her staff the details. They knew she'd been dealing with a personal. That was enough. She sat down. She opened her project file. She looked at the structural plans for the 6th floor. Her phone buzzed, a text from Diana, all signed and filed. "Congratulations, Josephine. Call me if anything comes up." She set the phone face down. Then she thought about Eloise, about a woman who had walked out of her first marriage at 29, with nothing but what she could carry, and had spent the next 50 years building something no one could take from her. About patience as a form of power. About documentation as a form of dignity. About the difference between reacting and deciding. Josephine had decided 14 months ago to be the one with the paper. She had the paper. She picked up her pen and went back to work. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning, she received a phone call from Clifford's attorney. Clifford, it turned out, had recently signed a lease for new office space. A small suite on the 8th floor of a commercial building in Buckhead, for his independent insurance practice. He had apparently decided to go out on his own, inspired perhaps by the events of recent months. The building was called the Beaumont Commerce Center. It was one of 4 commercial properties transferred to Josephine through the Eloise Beaumont Trust the previous December. His first lease payment was due on the 1st of May. She thanked the attorney, ended the call and sat for a moment. Then she called Diana. "Did you know?" she asked. "I noticed it on the property schedule," Diana said, and Josephine could hear the careful neutrality in her voice. "I thought I'd let you decide how to handle the renewal." Josephine thought about it for exactly 30 seconds. "Market rate," she said. "When the lease comes up." "Understood." She hung up. She looked out her window at the skyline, the cranes, the half-finished towers, the city rearranging itself block by block into something new. Her grandmother had built a legacy from one leaking roof in Decatur. Josephine had watched her do it. She had taken notes without quite realizing that's what she was doing, since she was 9 years old. She understood now why Eloise had always said that the most important things you ever build are the quiet ones. The ones nobody notices until they're already done, already standing, already yours. She turned back to her desk. She had a building to finish.